Mr. Chairman, friends, not too long ago, we were a nation full of self-pity, self-flagellation, and a sense of doom and deprivation. In about 12 years' time, I think significant changes are evident today. Earlier we've been talking about them, but now we are seeing some of them. I remember some 20 years ago when I was Special Officer of India's largest public sector undertaking at the time, about 8,000 crores investment, Visakhapatnam Steel Project. Until that time, I was a great socialist, like many of my generation were. Many of you would laugh at us to think that there actually could be some socialist thinkers and believers some 20, 25 years ago. But that stint cured me of many of those illusions, because I had then discovered that public sector was nothing but the private sector of those in public office. But that knowledge dawned on the people of this country at large and the governance system almost a decade later. We were very slow. But mercifully, it happened, even if it's out of compulsion, though not out of conviction. And things started changing, and that's the reason why we're now discussing what we're discussing. If Sanjay Bauru talks about how to take on the world on equal terms without a sense of fear or trepidation, and also with a sense of ease, giving and taking, fulfilling our obligations, accepting the challenges, and becoming a major power. Or if Dr. Khanna is talking about India's potential and promise and changing nature and our perception, not only self-perception, but the global perception of India, from a caged tiger, the famous Economist issue of 4th of May 1991. Some of you might have read it. For many of us, of the slightly elder generation, that was one of the most defining pieces of journalism, one of the most spectacular pieces of journalism, talking about our promise and potential and our problems. 2, being a majestic elephant, hopefully. But where are we now? In terms of geopolitical terms, I thought that Sanjay would take up some of these, so maybe I would go into some of the specifics. He gave you a broader picture of India, its future, its potential, its promise, and its challenges. 3 days ago, I was talking to a very perceptive American about India's role within our own neighborhood. He said, if India starts negotiating with Bhutan, India will end up becoming Bhutan. That started a chain of thought in my mind. Somehow, we still have not come to believe that we matter bigger than Bhutan or Nepal or Bangladesh or Pakistan. Somehow, when we deal with Bangladesh, for instance, we all the time look at Farakka barrage. We somehow try and browbeat, not realizing that there are actually gains to be made for both of us, and we need to be generous, not merely out of charity, but out of enlightened self-interest. Look at the Asian Highway. It's one of the most promising things for this country. For the first time, we are looking east. We are now thinking of linking up with Southeast Asia in a substantial measure. Look at our own states of UP and Bihar, some of the most backward in the world, some of the most populous, some of the most densely populated in the world. And I do not see any significant political solutions in the next few years. They're possible, but they're not practical given Indian constitutional and political constraints. One way to really reshape the future of something like 280 million people in those 2 states alone, and maybe if you include Bengal, Northeast, and Orissa, you're looking at something like 400 million people. And that's a large number. To reshape their future is linking up with Southeast Asia, and the road link is a critical one. And we still could not make Bangladesh understand that it's critical for their future as well as important for our own future. We still have to go through Siliguri to a very tortuous route and we still cannot link up the way we ought to. Take the case of Nepal. I am an agnostic, I don't care a damn for religion. But there is a natural link between Nepal and India, and yet you go to Nepal and there is a perception that somehow India is a bit of a nuisance. Nepal is a very reluctant ally. Many Nepalese think that Indians are big brothers. And yet from a purely economic standpoint of view, Nepal has excellent terms of trade in terms of textiles, garments. If Indians know how to invest in Nepal, have a good relationship with Nepal, have a good feeling for them, look at their future, then Indians could take great advantage of those terms and then give benefits to Nepalese people and Indian capital, and maybe even Indian workers, because there are no real barriers between Nepal and India. Or take the problems of internal security within the country. Naxalites in Andhra Pradesh, People's War Group, to the whole belt spreading up to Nepal, the Maoists. There are links. If we trust them, if they trust us, not merely fear us, maybe together we could confront the challenge effectively. The point I'm making is, if we want to make a significant geopolitical contribution and play our rightful role, first we must look at our neighbors. If only because we are infinitely bigger, with a far greater civilizational sense, with much greater level of confidence, we can afford to do that on terms which are not necessarily in the short term equal. It need not be. Eventually, we will all gain, because India cannot prosper if South Asia does not. Let's look a little towards the West. Pakistan, of course, the problems are well known. But go back a century or more. In those days, I do not know how many of you are aware, much of the global politics was centered around the warm water port, the requirements of warm water port for Russia, the Tsarist expansion of Russia, and the occupation of Central Asia, and somehow getting a corridor to the Arabian Sea via Afghanistan. And that's why the then British Indian government fought 3 Afghan wars in order to conquer and control Afghanistan. Of course, they were all doomed to failure ultimately. But the issue is, even today, how do we somehow establish a linkage with Central Asia, which is no longer a part of the Soviet Union? How do we make an impact? That means we have to deal with Islam, we have to deal with terrorism, we have to deal with a host of other factors, because oil, natural gas, and many other things that are of strategic importance in the next 25 to 30 or 50 years, they're all going to be dependent on what we do on the West for this country. There's much to be done. There's a lot that we have to understand. I don't know how many of you even can name the 5 Central Asian republics, which were once part of the Soviet Union. I don't know if many of the Indian people and businesses actually are going there and trading with them, interacting with them, understanding them, and trying to shape their countries and shape our own relationship with those countries and therefore our own future. And of course, China. Sanjay made significant points, but let me make one point which is optimistic. Despite all the unfavorable comparisons, one good thing that's happening is our own sense of a long-term vision. 20, 30, 40 years ago, we all used to say, whatever be the failings of China, that's a country with a long-term national vision. They look at themselves and look at the world in terms of 50 years, 100 years. They have a truly long-term national vision, whereas we always look for tomorrow, day after, somehow manage, survive. But I think happily we must give it to our political system across the spectrum. It's not this party or that. We now are looking a little towards the long term. For instance, the National Highways Project, the Sagarmala, the Asian Highway that I talked about, and the significant diplomatic initiatives of Look East policy, as well as looking towards Central Asia and the West Asia, and even a relationship with China and the rest of the world. All these are now shaped by a sense of long-term vision, and I think many people, Sanjay included, have played a significant role in changing this perception of ourselves and our future.